One of the most frustrating things for new wood turners is dealing with wet wood and wood drying. And I've been seeing a lot of questions lately about how wet can it be before I start turning? How long can a log lay out in the woods before I can cut it up into bowl blanks? How dry does it need to be before I start turning? Yada, yada, yada. Just so many questions, right? And I think that all of those questions and those answers is what frustrates a lot of new turners, because as a new wood turner, you want to grab a piece of wood and you want to make something, and you want to sand it and you want to put a finish on it and you want to be done. And if you're dealing with wet wood, you just can't do it that quickly. That's why you'll see guys trying to speed up the drying of products that they're making. And so I thought I'd just do a quick video on just talking about the whole process and your options. The answers are not uh, black and white, shall we say. There's a gray area, and I don't even know if I've totally figured out what I prefer in some instances. So if we think of a log, we just need to understand, and I'm sure you've seen this before, but a log is just like a bunch of straws. The wood fibers are laying like this in line with the log. And you could think of the wood fibers like a bunch of straws, and they have like openings in them because they're sucking up the nutrients out of the roots, right? They're bringing the water, the sap, up to the tree and up to the leaves. Well, when you cut the end of a log, and I just got a small one so I can hold it, and it's the same way for a big log. When you cut the end of the log, you have all of those straws exposed. And it's very important, because what would happen if I filled these straws up with moisture? Well, it would start, the water would leave the ends, both ends, much quicker than the water would leave the outside of the straws, right? And the same thing's true with wood. So when we cut these fibers on the end, moisture is going to leave the end of the log much quicker than it's going to leave the sides, okay? And so what happens is you will get the wood will start shrinking. When the end grain loses that moisture quicker than the side grain, it will start shrinking, and that's all the stresses will cause it to crack, okay? And so if you want to take a bowl blank and you want to make sure that you're not going to lose that bowl blank, I tell people, go ahead and rough turn that bowl. So go ahead, cut your log to the length that you want for your bowl blank, cut your bowl blank out or whatever you're going to make, turn that bowl as quick as you can, or you can put them in a garbage bag for a couple weeks, but you can't do that too long because it'll start molding on you. But you can buy a few weeks of not losing any moisture by just putting them in a garbage bag. But you go turn that bowl, rough turn that bowl, and it'll be much easier to turn that bowl wet, and you'll guarantee that that bowl blank is not going to crack like this on the end grain, okay? When you turn one of these bowls wet, what is going to happen is the end grain, I've got the end grain here, okay? So if I find my straws, the straws would be running like this. The fiber would be running like this. That end grain, and I'm going to make sure you can see this. Make sure you can see. You can see the end grain is coming at the camera here, and you can see how that has popped up here in the center. You can see how it's not level. If I rotate this around, you should be able to see how that is warped, okay? The key, so this is losing moisture and this isn't as much, and so that shrinks and that pops these ends up, okay? Now, I've got another one here. You can see how much these things can warp, okay? And so when you rough turn these bowls when they're wet, you have to account for this warping. A little bit of warping, some people like bowls, they can finish them like this warped, and I don't mind the look, but if you want a nice round bowl, you've got to account for that warping. I will not be able to finish this bowl round, because if I measure, here I have 9 1/8 inches, and if I go 90 degrees to that, I have 8 7/8. So I have a 1/4 inch difference, and I left the rim about a 1/4 inch, maybe 3/8 inch big. So if I squared this up, I'm not going to have any material left. This bowl is probably just going to be nothing. So this is a bowl I turned many years ago, and I didn't leave it thick enough. And so when you turn a wet log, you need to make sure you leave it. Most people say about 10% of the diameter. Okay, so this was 9 inches. I should have left it about 0.9 inches in diameter or thickness on out here, and that would allow it to warp a little bit, but not warp so much that it would crack, or it would not warp so much that I couldn't get it round. So if I left it at 0.9 inches, that would allow it to warp a little bit and not crack, but still give me enough room to still return this, mount it back on my lathe after it's dried, okay, and finish it out. So turning wet bowls like that can be a little bit of a process, because you've got to mount it on the lathe, you've got to turn your rough cut bowl, then you're going to have to, I used to put it in a box of wood shavings that, from your turn your bowl, you've got all these wood shavings. I put it in a box. I would write on the box, 10-inch bowl or whatever, and I put the date. And then you can weigh it, and when it stops losing weight, you know that it is dry. Or you could just leave it in there 6 months or whatever, and then pull it out, and you'll see that they've warped a little bit, or they've cracked a little bit, and then you turn them. So you got to remount them on the lathe, true them up, and sand them and finish them. Okay, so it's quite a process, and most new wood turners don't really want to wait that 6 months because they just got a lathe and they want to finish the product, and I get it. I will tell you this: once you get into being a wood turner, you'll have so many rough turn bowls that you won't be able to get to finishing them. And so it's a short-term problem, I think. You really won't run into that problem as you turn for a few years. So just know that. So that's turning them wet. And like I told you, if you follow the 10% of the diameter to leave the thickness 10% of the diameter, you will pretty much be able to take any log, rough turn a bowl, and probably have at least 90% success of that bowl becoming a finished product, okay? Now, if you do not rough turn it, I have a video on making bowl blanks, but and normally what I showed you there is you cut out the pith. So you take this pith and you cut it out, and you'd have a bowl blank on this side and a bowl blank on that side. Here I didn't do that. This is a piece of elm, and you can see the cracks already developing. It's cracking because this end grain's shrinking and it's cracking. So one option, if you can't make your bowl blanks, or maybe the log's not big enough and you still want to be able to turn something out of it, one thing you can do is leave this much longer so that those cracks don't go all the way, and you can cut. If I'd have left this twice as long, I could have cut 4 inches of crack off and 4 inches of crack off, and I still would have a log possibly that I could make a bowl or some kind of a hollow form turning out of, okay? Now, I have the exact same log that I cut up the exact same day, okay? And I cut the pith out, okay? I cut the pith out, and it has a little crack there, but you can tell that it's not really cracked, and I did leave it a little bit longer too. So this is the width of the bowl I can make, and so I left it a little bit longer so I can cut the little cracks off and get a bowl blank out of it. That's not guaranteed. Even when you cut the pith out, sometimes I will lose bowl blanks. They will still crack. It's not 100%. So like I said, if you want 100%, go ahead and turn the bowl while it's wet if you can, okay? Now, the advantage of cutting your bowl blank like this and then letting it dry is that I can pull this out, I can mount it on my lathe, and I can turn this all in one day. Just take me an hour or so, and I can turn this bowl, put finish on it, and it is a finished product. I don't have to fool with it again. So it's a lot less steps than mounting it, turning it wet, and then putting it back on 6 months later, retruing it up, and finish turning that bowl. What's the disadvantage? Well, the disadvantage is this bowl blank can crack as it's drying, so you can lose the bowl blank. Another disadvantage is it is 10 times harder to turn this dry seasoned wood as it is turning wet wood. So if you're removing a ton of material, that's my rule of thumb, and everybody's going to have their own preferences. But the bigger the bowl, the more I want to turn it wet, because I want to get rid of all of that material while the wood is still not seasoned, not as hard, and it's moving those shavings really easy. And the smaller the bowl, the more I just want to go ahead and let it dry and just finish turn the whole thing once it's dry. So this log is probably one that's kind of in between, right? This one I would have no problem turning this rough or turning this dry. I would have no problem turning this bowl dry. There's not a ton of wood to remove. You know, you're going to be taking a little bit out here, but it's just not a ton of wood to remove. Now, if I'm doing this walnut bowl, it may not look like much, but you know, I would rather rough turn this wet if I could, but you just can't get to them all. So I'm going to have to turn this one dry. This is dry. And it's just going to take a lot longer to rough this bowl out than if I did it wet. Okay. Now, I just recently, you saw a video, I just recently did this bowl. Now, this is a big bowl. I would not want to do this bowl dry. This bowl was hard to do wet, and it's an 18.5-inch diameter bowl by about 10.5 inches deep. So there is a lot of material to remove. And if you did that as a dry log, if you let that log dry out, one thing is you might lose it because it might crack. But it would take me twice as long at least to rough that bowl out, because you'd have to go back to the sharpener many times to sharpen your gouges because that wood would be so hard and seasoned. Whereas when it's wet, you can almost do it just a couple sharpenings because the wet wood just comes off the lathe so much better. I want to make sure I cover all of this. So my rule of thumb is the smaller the bowl blank, the more I just want to let it dry. I might lose some to cracking, but here in Southern Ohio, there's a lot of wood available. So if I lose some to cracking, I've always got more wood than I can turn available. And so I don't stress it too much. I know when you're a beginning wood turner, every piece of wood that you drive by and you see a pile of wood, and you look at it, you're like, oh man, can I have a chunk of that wood? Can I have a chunk of that wood? And you start bringing all these wood blanks in, and I've got more wood blanks than I'll ever turn. So just be aware that we're kind of get addicted to collecting chunks of wood, I think, as wood turners. But the smaller the bowl blank, the more I just want to let it dry and risk losing it. And the bigger the bowl blanks, those I want to try, if I have time, to go ahead and rough turn those while they're wet. And again, you want to leave the thickness of the rim should be about 10% of the overall diameter. And the options for drying your rough turn blanks, like I said, you can put them in a box with the wood shavings and let them dry for several months. Or I have been painting Elmer's school glue or Tree Saver, I think was the product I bought off of a woodworking place. But you just paint this Elmer's wood glue all over your bowl, and I kind of go a little thicker on the end grain, because remember, the end grain is what's losing the moisture. So on the bowl, I would paint it a little thicker on the end grain with the Elmer's glue and wouldn't worry about it as much on the side grain. I better make sure I answer the question of how soon can you start turning a log. So you can start turning a log as soon as you cut that log down, okay? So you can cut a chunk off, and if it's a local log, I would just recommend cutting as much off as you can handle at the time, and then you can go back out later and cut another chunk off, okay, when you need it, if you could get to it and rough turn some bowls. You do not have to wait for that thing to dry, though. You can turn it as wet as soon as it is cut. Um, if it's in log form and someone hasn't cut it up into like firewood lengths, then you can, you've got some time. It'll start rotting on you sooner than you think, but your log, you have months, okay, that you can let that log lay there on the ground and still get a good product out of it, okay. But you don't want to let it lay there a year or so because it'll start rotting. You'll start getting worms. It'll start spalting, but then it starts spalting too much, okay. And I've got an example here of this is a piece of sycamore, and it's spalted, but it's become it's too far gone. Now some people will take cactus juice and put these in a vacuum chamber and suck it in and harden this wood. To me, there's so much wood available. I don't fool with that, but you can do that. But this, you could not turn this piece without putting that cactus juice in or hardening it in some way. And it's not that your tools are too dull or anything like that, or your technique. It's just the wood fibers are just no longer really have any strength, and they're kind of soft and they're deteriorated. So you don't want to let a log lay that long to where it gets too far gone. Okay. So to me, um, as soon as you can, you want to get that log and you want to either rough turn bowls or you want to cut them into bowl blanks, like this. Cut them into bowl blanks like this. And if you can't get to them to do either of those, I would leave them in log form as long of a log as you can. Okay, because what will happen is the ends will start cracking. Okay, but you can come in and just cut the ends off, and you'll still have the rest of your log that hasn't cracked yet, and you can try to then cut a bowl blank out of it or rough turn it. Okay. I want to also say that I don't know everything. This last time I was doing a video on wet wood, one of my subscribers said to boil it in salt water, and I actually didn't do the research yet, but I plan on doing it. But there's something about the salt in the water, and it's supposed to help the wood not to deform and crack or something. So I'm going to research that, and there may be other methods that can help. I know some people talk about boiling them, and I don't know how you could take a giant bowl and boil it in salt water. So some of that's not practical for large items. Now, if you got small items, right? If boiling in salt water it works, you could rough turn a bunch of bowls like this and boil them in salt water, and that may be a nice solution. I'm up for new ideas. I'm always wanting to learn. I also want to let you know that you can turn wood that's not wet and it's not dry, right? And so if you turn a wet bowl blank, it's going to take, in a box of wood shavings, or if you paint it with the Elmer's glue, it's going to take, 3 to 6 months at least for that to dry. And you can weigh it on a scale to know when it's done drying. Or you can just wait a year and it'll be dry, right? Uh, you can also turn wood that is somewhere in the middle of the process. So you got a bowl blank, maybe. You've got a bowl blank that was wet, and it's been 3 months or it's been 5 months. And I think they say it dries about an inch a year, right? So it's not a dry bowl blank, but it's not a super wet bowl blank like it was when you cut the tree down, okay? And so when you turn a bowl with that kind of wood, it instead of that rough term bowl blank needing to set for 6 months, you might be able to. It might dry in 2 weeks to 3 weeks if you turn a somewhat wet bowl blank. Okay, so you'll just have to experiment with that. I'm sure you could test it and get the exact temperatures and get the answer for that. But I also want to talk about spindle turning because we've spent a lot of time talking about logs. If you're doing spindle turning, which I do a lot of, sometimes I do it with wet wood, sometimes I do it with dry wood. If you do it with wet wood, just know that you might lose some product to cracking, or you might have cracks in your product. But If you want to do dry wood, I'd say cut your logs as long as you can, and know that you're going to get, 6 inches or so of cracking on the ends, and then you're just going to be able to cut those off, and you'll get several trees and snowmen and mushrooms or whatever you want to make, birds. I've showed you those out of this log, and you really don't need to prepare it much. I don't even paint the ends because I know it's going to crack, and so I just leave it in really long form. Okay. Lastly, I want to encourage you. Okay, you're not the only one that's been frustrated with dealing with wet wood drying and cracking and all of that. Okay, so I want to show you a piece of locust, and you can see the cracks in this locust. Okay, as it dried, the end grain shrunk and it cracked. I want to show you the same tree and the same piece of locust, and it's not cracked. Okay, I did nothing different with it, and it didn't crack. Okay, here is a piece of oak, and there is no crack at all. This is didn't do anything special, and this is just perfect, no crack in it at all. It's not even a straight log, and it didn't crack. I tell you all that to say, if you prepare your bowl blanks exactly how all the YouTube videos say and all the professionals say, and you seal them with the whatever the greatest sealer is, you're still going to have pieces of wood that are just under certain stresses, and during the drying process, they're going to crack. Okay. That's why I said if you want to guarantee to get a bowl out of that blank, you want to turn it while it's wet, before it starts drying. But don't stress out if you go prepare some bowl blanks and you lose 10-15% of them to cracking. Okay, it could just be the wood was going to crack, and there's just nothing you can do about it. Okay, so I wanted to show you that not all wood's the same. Some trees are grown where the wind's blowing, they're under so much stress, and others are protected and they're just straight grain and they're not going to crack. And some wood varieties, right, are more stable than others. Like I have good luck with walnut. Cherry, on the other hand, seems to crack a lot on me, and I don't know why, but I don't stress out about it because all woods are not created the same. I've went fast. I hope that you've learned something in this video, but I'm sure there's some things I didn't cover, and I'm sure there's some things that maybe you need me to clarify. Please comment, ask me questions if there's anything that I need to clarify for you, or if I need to do a follow-up video and answer for you. Just let me know. I'm here to help you the best I can and help you not be so frustrated with dealing with wet wood and the whole drying process.